and we're speaking today to Professor Vered Tohar, who is in the department of I always get this wrong, the literature of the Jewish people.
Jewish people.
The Jewish people, right. How many other departments are called that in the world? Not many.
This is the only one.
Wow.
Right. So Professor Tohar has the distinction, and I think it's really important these days, of being both a professor and a poet. I think sometimes as professors, we get to be poets very infrequently. And you've decided really to cultivate that voice. And I think, I know that Vered works on lots of comparative literature, comparative stories, comparative fables. So you're always in a kind of literary mode. I think that's kind of our blessing as literature professors, is that we get to think about the things we really love and care about. That is, again, for me, a blessing. And just coming back to you and your work, both as a scholar and as a poet, I think we need more people like you as we continue after October 7th. For our series on shelter, we're doing one coming up on scars. You wrote this beautiful poem. I'd love it if you would read it in the original Hebrew. You and I worked together afterwards on the English, but I think we really want to hear the music of your voice first.
Okay, so first I will say that I'm very happy to be here. And I mean, we're talking about happiness. I don't think that any Israeli is now in a mode of happiness, but I'm glad to make this conversation, and thank you for inviting me for your project. I think it's really important. I will say that I think that after October 7th, I find it hard to be in the professor mode, and I find it hard to go back to my desk and write my regular articles about pre-modern Hebrew poetry. And I think that this mode of being also a poet really helped me to go through the last 11 months. Although I should say that my profession of being a scholar of pre-modern Jewish literature helps me to find some consolation in the situation, because we had some very hard times in the past, in the last 2,000 years, and we got through them. And so I have some historic perspective.
I was always, we had this conversation when I'm always amazed that when you see all these like news panels and these people, there's never a historian to give, to just show us, that a perspective, and there's never a poet to maybe reflect differently about what's happening. It's always the same people, who have the same perspective, and it's never really a conversation. And to me, a historian is a must. But so it's interesting that you find solace in that. That's great.
Because I can see the wide context, and you can look at the wide context from two different angles. I mean, you can come and say, oh, it happens all the time, every 100 years or 1,000 years, or we have a new pogrom. It happens all the time. But the optimistic angle is to come and say, okay, but we got through it, and we are here today, so we will get over it again, even now. I mean, it depends if you are, whether you are an optimistic or a pessimistic person, or
I think it really also depends on the day. Like, I think we go through so much. I mean, we're in a pressure cooker, and I feel like we go through these cycles of everything. I mean, I don't think people understand. I mean, there can be a day of fear, there can be a day of anger, there can be a day of depression. It really, we are not in control of what's happening. And I think by writing, it's kind of, we're taking back some of that control. We're just saying, okay, I'm gonna stop and think. And that gives us just some sort of balance.
Yeah.
When I go out into the real world, Vered, you mentioned you're at an open day. The department meeting we had was like a cage match in a wrestling arena. Because once you leave this private realm and go into this public realm, it's just you have to kind of guard yourself. And I think that's part of also what we're doing is trying to find a place for reflection. And that's not only a physical space, a safe space, or workshop space, for example, but it's that space in your head that you work so hard to get to. So, you also spoke about the history and your work, the poem, which we'd like you to read now, it in itself is about personal history, intergenerational history. So why don't you read in both languages, and then we'll talk some more about it.
Okay. So first I'll read it in Hebrew, the original version of the text. מקלט. אשרי הסבתא שלי, גולדה קציקה לבית דוד, זכרה לברכה, שכבר לא עמנו, אבל תמיד איתי, שלא ראתה ילדים יהודים שוב מתחבאים בתוך ארון. Okay. And now the English version. Blessed is my Babe, Golda Katzikal. May her memory be for a blessing, no longer with us, but always with me. Not seeing Jewish children hiding in closets again.
The English does a little bit of justice to it, but the Hebrew and hearing the musicality of your voice, I'll just tell you what I was struck by. When you read it in Hebrew and you got to the last line, it sounded like there was about to be a continuation. So I'm just wondering, the poem dwells on that kind of intergenerational trauma, which we'd love you to talk about. But is there a what's next in this poem?
Yeah. Me screaming.
And that's horrifying and funny at the same time, because and we can all, it's like, to me, there's silence after that, because there's the element of confinement and I it's and that's the outsider and the insider, because what we thought was our burden becomes now our burden. That to me was and can you just have something else after that? I hope so, but at this point where we're at, it just seems like it's stuck.
Yes, it's really stuck. It's really stuck, and I'm not cynical. I'm really glad that my grandma is not alive to see this, because this generation, they really hid in closets so that the Nazis would not find them. And I'm really glad that they don't see this, because it's horrible. I think that this poem is my own post-trauma, as being a third generation for the Holocaust, and raised upon all the family stories about what happened in the 40s in Romania. And I am the first grandchild who was born in Israel, in a free country, in a democratic country, in the country of the Jewish people. And I'm called Vered after Rosa, which was my grandmother's little sister who was murdered. And they always looked up at me. I mean, I was the first tzabarit of the family, and I went to the army, and I grew up freely in my own country. She was so proud to be in Israel. She never went back to Romania. She never agreed to go back, even to look for her house or her school, or she didn't want to go there. She always said that our country is Israel. This is our country. She wanted to delete all her childhood in Europe.
That's a very strong metaphor, this idea of deleting everything.
Yes.
You can see how we went on from Miklat, shelter, to scarred, because Ronit and I have been talking, and she says we when we walk around, we see everybody with varying degrees of scars.
Yes, yes. But my grandmother she was so proud to make Aliyah to Israel, and she always said to me that my own existence in the world is the real meaning of her defeating the Nazis. I mean, me, Vered, I am her. I'm the proof for her to
survive, exist. There's so many words
to beat the Nazis. Yeah, and now to see what happens on 7th October. I mean, it's not. I mean, and she went through all the wars here in Israel. Okay, the Yom Kippur War, the Lebanon War, all the big wars, but this was a pogrom, and this is something which I'm sure that she could not handle it. It would have devastated her, because she really thought that history, as she knew it, the Jewish history, could never happen again in Israel, in the Jewish country. Not the war, but the pogrom.
It's so, they came here and they each had their own trauma, and it's almost, we're now united by a collective trauma. None of us can really escape it. I mean, the child in the closet, for me, it's almost like we took a symbol from the Holocaust and we kind of dispatched it, and now it's the symbol of October 7th, and it's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's very, very hard. I think we're also at a point where we still, and we've been talking about this, we still don't have the time to really reflect. We're still in it. So
I still can't believe it. I can't believe this happened to us.
You're still there?
I can't believe it, that there was such an horrible pogrom in my country, in my homeland.
So it's interesting that you're talking about trauma, and that we all suffer this trauma. And the thing about poetry, and we're so grateful to have had the opportunity to talk with you, Professor Tohar, is that the poetry that you write expresses something that all of those who are undergoing trauma can feel and relate to. That's going back to what Ronit said. You should be on Channel 12 on the panel. And not only to give the historical perspective, but because then all the people sitting at the table on the left and the right who are divided by the cliches of their politics suddenly can say, oh, this does unite us. And then what's incumbent upon us is to find the language that emerges from the poetry that we're writing that can unite us. Shelley said poets are the great legislators of the world. Ben Jonson compares poets and priests, which I think is much better, because poets, they make the world. And we're grateful for your poem and for talking to us today.
Thank you.
תודה רבה.